Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I am here to give the talk about Steigerwald's monitoring and how we are using innovative approaches to monitoring to essentially be able to monitor the entire site within our budget. I could not do this research without Ian Edgar and Sneha Rao. They are my research partners, and I'm so grateful for their contributions. So let's get started. So I'm going to provide just a really brief background of Steigerwald as a restoration project for those of you who might be just joining us right now or joining us online. If you've been sitting through the session, then you probably are very familiar with Steigerwald as a project at this point. So Steigerwald is located near Washougal, Washington. It's very close to the Bonneville Dam and the spectrum of the entire lower Columbia River estuary. This project is over 1,000 acres of habitat. Various types of habitats are being restored. One of the major changes to the project is this reconnection of Gibbons Creek to its a traditional alluvial fan, the lake, and then the Columbia. So you can see here, this is Gibbons as it was channelized, and here's the fish ladder. We've removed all of that infrastructure, and here you can see what the site looks like in post-restoration. So we have a fully engaged floodplain, alluvial fan, and a really, really solid connection to the Columbia River. This is during a high flow event. So with such a large and dynamic project, one of the questions always comes to mind of what do we monitor and how do we afford to monitor it? Well, there are a lot of things that we could monitor. There's so many important things that should and could be looked at a site this size and dynamic. For us, some of the guiding work that is essentially leading the monitoring metrics that we are monitoring comes from the Columbia Estuary Ecosystem Restoration Program. This program is run by Bonneville Power as well as the Army Corps of Engineers. This is the program that provides the funding for Steigerwald to become restored. The goals and objectives here are to increase salmon habitat and mitigate for salmon take upriver from the dams. And so today, when I talk about what we're monitoring, you will see that a lot of the metrics and focus of monitoring is on salmon habitat restoration. This echoes what the project's overall goals and objectives were. So we have those programmatic goals and objectives, as well as a monitoring program that's already in place across all of the SERP restoration projects. And then adding to the mix of what we monitor and why are all of the permitting requirements. So we have over 8 jurisdictions that are contributing to the monitoring plan because we have had to fill out permits for doing different fill and wetland creation, and all of these different jurisdictions have different monitoring requirements. So we've taken all of these things and we've mixed it up in our martini glass with budgetary constraints and, of course, working with all of our partners, making sure that we are doing the best we can to monitor as many things as possible within those budgetary constraints. And this drink took about 3 to 4 years to make, but I drank it very quickly. And then the monitoring plan was done. So we finished the monitoring plan last year. However, I will say this is a living document, and things that we are not monitoring that are monitored specifically by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because this is a national refuge, that is outside of the scope of our monitoring plan, but it should be considered in terms of thinking about long-term information coming out of Steigerwald. So please reach out to all of us if you have more questions about that. I'm going to do a very brief overview of Steigerwald's monitoring and talk about our innovation and how we are approaching such a large project. So I want to just start this talk with kind of taking a step back and thinking about lessons learned. I realize the project is now just in post-construction, but we've actually learned a lot about monitoring and creating an extremely robust and integrated monitoring plan during this process. One of the things that might seem very straightforward to everyone is to collect data to answer questions. Don't just collect data. This might echo with a lot of folks because I know that a lot of us coming into a monitoring program may see a lot of data on the table that were collected because it felt like the right thing to do, but were maybe not collected in a way to answer specific questions or hypotheses. For Steigerwald, we have really tried to tailor our monitoring goals and objectives to be measurable and essentially evaluatable goals and hypotheses. We've also worked with partners to create what we're calling a trigger table, which allows us to take the information that we're collecting and then compare it to ideal conditions. So thresholds for essentially channel head cuts and plant community development and things like this. These were developed before the restoration project was complete so that we can now use that as a way to engage partners when we're talking about adaptive management if it needs to happen. And then, of course, having a data management plan for all the data that you're going to collect is really critical. Even if the data management plan is that we're going to have a series of Excel workbooks, or we're going to have an Access database, or we're just going to put all the photo points in one folder, making sure everyone on the team is well aware of what that data plan is going to be really critical for that longevity and usability of the data. So those are my big lessons learned, and I'm happy to answer more questions about those. Now, for our approach, we're doing a really classic before-after control or BACI approach, but we're sprinkling in a little bit more context because we're using reference sites as well. So along with looking at Steigerwald before and after restoration and monitoring those conditions, we're also monitoring conditions of 3 different reference sites. And one of these reference sites, Campbell Slough, also has a pit tag, which is very helpful when we later talk about comparing pit tag data across Steigerwald and other sites. Having reference sites that are monitored at the same time step and with the same metrics as your restoration site is going to help you understand what is considered natural variability across the system and what is essentially the impact of the restoration. I'm not going to get into a lot of details about all the different monitoring objectives and methods, but you can find all that information in our online data dashboard as well as our monitoring plan. But I do want to provide a quick overview. We think that monitoring these wetland physical conditions is really critical to the project. In addition, we're monitoring Gibbons Creek, its alluvial fan, and the channel that was developed to flow out into the Columbia. We're also going to be looking at site-wide plant community conditions, as well as planting and floodplain plant seed survival. A lot of money in the project went into planting the areas as well as seeding them, so we want to make sure that those areas are being successful. Another major goal of this effort is to push all of this data to our public partners and essentially the public in general. This allows everybody to be on the same page and see how those conditions are shifting over time. We're utilizing Tableau, which is an online data sharing and management platform. I have a talk link at the end of this talk today if you'd like to learn more about that. We're also integrating traditional and innovative technology across the site to really try to leverage those traditional data collection techniques and get the most we can out of our essentially monitoring budget. So I'm going to talk through these really briefly. And as I do that, I'm going to be showing some images of our data dashboard online. This is something that anybody can access right now. I do want to premise this talk with the fact that we are just now starting to collect post-restoration data. Full construction of the site was just complete this winter. So a lot of the data that I'm showing today is pre-construction data, but we've created the dashboards and the infrastructure to hold our data so that we can easily push data into these dashboards to share with our partners as we move into post conditions. We're collecting water surface elevation and temperature data and hopefully water quality data across the site. You can already see that we have 4 years of data collected for these metrics, and some of those post conditions are visible. For looking at physical conditions across the site, one of the main physical conditions we're tracking is topography and channel development and change over time. That main slough that flows out to the Columbia is one of those areas that we're going to be monitoring very closely with channel cross sections. And you can see that we've already started analyzing that data to be able to track those changes over time. This is also one of those things on our trigger table, where if we see minimum depths or head cuts, we're going to want to bring it back to our project partners and potentially discuss adaptive management if it's required. Plant communities are so critical to salmon habitat and to essentially the base of the food web for these ecosystems. And so we are tracking these conditions very closely. We have traditional transects set up at our reference sites and Steigerwald And we're also going to be taking that data and extrapolating it across the site utilizing our drone technology. One of the things that's really powerful about our approach to monitoring Steigerwald is that during the design phase, we created some really robust model outcomes that are now our hypotheses. One of these model outcomes was conducted using the ecosystem functions model. This leverages modeled hydrological data to inform us how the hydrology on the site is going to change. Using our reference site plant community data, we then were able to map out predicted plant community distributions across the site post-restoration. We're going to use that to essentially verify outcomes post, utilizing our drone imagery. Now, this is a map of Steigerwald. You've seen a lot of maps of Steigerwald today. And you can see all these black X's. These are where we are going to put, or we have, I should say, put our ground control points for monitoring with the drone technology. We have a really basic drone setup, and it's actually quite affordable. We have a $4,000 DJI Phantom 4 drone that has a near-infrared camera as well as an RGB camera. This multispectral setup allows us to get extremely high accuracy and high resolution data. We're talking centimeters in resolution across the entire site. You can see these RGB images. So these are raster of the essentially the surface image from the drone. And these are just beautiful pictures, and you can really see pre and post construction impacts with these images. So these images alone are really powerful when you're talking about monitoring. They also allow us to take that traditional transect data that we've collected and those ground control point data and extrapolate that information across the entire site. So we go from monitoring traditionally about less than 1% of the total acreage for plant community information, and then transposing that across the site with model to really see how the whole site has turned out. And it's really an amazing process. We also can use that drone imagery to create accurate hydrologic outcomes. So we can see how habitat opportunity has shifted pre and post restoration. Now, I've recently, just last week, gave a very, very detailed talk about the process we go through in collecting the drone data, using the plant community data, classifying these images, and making site-wide vegetation and hydrologic maps. So I'm going to share a link to that at the end of the talk today if you'd like to see more information about that work. You can see here we're still in constructing the digital elevation models and creating the basis of those classifications. Now, drones are also excellent for photo monitoring. If you don't feel like jumping into image classification, you can at least take really, really useful oblique images across a site over time. We have 36 oblique photo monitoring points across Steigerwald. Here is the Gibbons Canal, and you can see how it was completely removed. And I really feel like that image speaks more than any of my hydrographs. Now I'm showing a map of Steigerwald to give you a little bit more context for the next image and to talk about our fish monitoring. Here you can see that main outflow I've circled in red. And that is where the site is connected all year long to the Columbia River. Here's what that area looked like before construction occurred, completely disconnected. Now this is fully engaged. I did show this image earlier. You can see that when it is fully engaged, you have a full lake, you have a full floodplain, and there's a lot of access opportunity for salmonids. We are installing 2 pit tag arrays on this channel in this area, and you can see those by the red line. These pit tag arrays are going to allow us to detect the fish coming from upstream in using Steigerwald as habitat. So if you're not familiar with the pit tag technology, essentially upriver of us or up in the Columbia, hatcheries and other researchers are tagging fish with a little bit of a transponder. This is called a pit tag. And as they swim into the site, our antenna, our pit tag arrays, will pick up on those signals and then send that information to us via the cloud so we can see the information about these fish. Where did they come from? Who tagged them? What species are they? We can also tell things like how long did they stay in the site. So it's extremely informative information. And as I mentioned earlier, one of our reference sites also has a pit tag set up, so we'll be able to compare that data. The one innovative thing about our pit tag array is that it is a flexible cable. Instead of having a hardened cable or essentially PVC pipe array, it is just a flexible antenna across the entire channel. This is going to allow us to essentially fix the pet tag array more frequently and more affordably. We have a lot of wood moving in and out of the system, and so these pit tag array areas can be very problematic. And so we chose this flexible antenna because one, it was more affordable and also allowed us to fix the antenna more quickly and more affordably. We're really excited to get this online. So the pit tag array is going to be going online this month, and we're going to continue to push our data into our data dashboards online to share with our project partners and the public. We're also going to do a full suite of post monitoring this summer, including more drone analysis and modeling. And we're just excited to tell everybody about it. So please reach out if you have more questions. And I want to give a big shout out and thanks to all of the many people and organizations who contribute to the research, to the monitoring, and to the restoration work. Chris Collins has done an amazing job helping everyone come together and collaborate on this project, and I'm so grateful for his efforts and for the efforts of everyone involved. And speaking of everyone involved, I do want to give another shout out to my team. Sneha Rao and Ian Egger are just the best, and I'm so grateful to work with them. I recommend that you go to our YouTube channel and look at some other talks that we have just given that gives more background on some of the project components that I've discussed today. Thank you very much.